In this video, I'm going to go over how I converted a horse trailer, old 1970s horse trailer box, into a mobile bar and why I ended up doing that in the first place. And I'll put some time code in the description if you want to skip around, because it might end up being kind of a longer video, but if you want to skip to the end, I'll do like a tour walkthrough of the whole thing. This isn't going to be like a tutorial video, but if you're interested in the project or you're thinking about doing something similar, I'll kind of just walk you through my thought process on each step of the way. So I originally started converting this trailer to be a coffee trailer. So I was thinking of everything I would need to plumb it for espresso machines and having filtered water and stuff like that. The thing ended up sitting for over a year, partially converted. The coffee company failed. And then the COVID lockdown happened, and one of my good friends and I, Ryan and I, we lived really close, and we were quarantining, but we thought, okay, maybe just the two of us can work together on this project, and let's finish this thing during the COVID lockdown, and we did. So the original plan was to build it out as a coffee trailer. And to do that in the state of Michigan, and I think a lot of other states are like this, we basically had to license it as a food truck. And in such a small trailer, that was a challenge. And it actually ended up being a pretty intricate build for a horse trailer bar. I mean, I see a lot of other ones out there and they're pretty bare bones, like of a shell, and that gets the job done. And I think that's cool. I'm actually working on another one that will probably be more like that. But the build ended up being pretty intricate. We had a sound system, a 7,500 watt capability in there. We had multiple water systems, 5 sinks, hot water. We had to have proper food storage, all that kind of stuff. The original trailer, honestly, was in pretty good shape. The woman I bought it from took really good care of it. It was from the 70s. She's always kept it painted, kept an eye on the rust. The axles were in good shape. A lot of trailers out there aren't, but this one was in good shape. The first step in the conversion was the fabrication and doing some of the basic framing of what we were doing. So we started by gutting out all of the horse things in there. It was actually really clean. You would think a horse trailer would be pretty nasty and smelly, but it really wasn't at all. It was actually a pretty clean trailer in this case. Then we got to cutting out the window. So we did a mix of angle grinding and sawzalling that out. We didn't really change much structurally besides the window framing, and we just ended up welding square tube there, and then we ended up cleaning that up later. On the outside, we also welded some metal brackets right to the trailer to hold the exterior bar. The original lumber, like the floor of the trailer, was mostly in good shape in the walls, so we left it. I mean, like I said, we cleaned it, and then we started insulating after that. So we did about 1 inch of insulation all over the trailer. We left a channel in the floor for the electrical and plumbing. I thought this was kind of a cool part of the build. It was wide enough to run a few like 12 gauge lines through and PEX from the other side of the trailer for the fresh water tank. And I also wrapped the PEX in heat tape for this step, just in case if it ever got cold down there in the winter, or if we didn't winterize it right. After the floor was insulated, we put a layer of plywood over it, and that kind of created the channel. Then we polyurethane the floor itself just to keep out water from the plywood and keep it from ever rotting if water spilled on it or whatever. I'll go over the electrical in more detail later, but at this point we also ran in all the Romex and stuff in the floor before we enclosed all the walls there. The ceiling insulation was a little tricky because of the curve. What ended up working well is we just cut slits a couple inches wide, and that helped make the curve. Once we knew what the layout was going to be, we started looking for those bigger appliances like the fridges and sinks and stuff, and we started getting all that stuff together. The countertops originally came from IKEA, and including the outdoor one, which I ended up replacing pretty quickly because it just did not hold up to the elements. At this point, we were also doing some of the cedar tongue and groove. This cedar is like pretty thin, worked out well for this project because it didn't take up too much headroom. This is a bit challenging because we didn't have like a nice wood surface to nail it into, so we ended up having to pre-drill every hole in the square tubing. But it ended up working out, and it looks really cool at the end of the day, and it was worth the extra effort to do that. Next, I'll go over the water system. Like I mentioned earlier, there's actually 2 separate water systems in this project, and the reason being is that even though they're both freshwater tanks, they're both clean, filtered city water. Because it was going to be a coffee trailer, we wanted one system that was super filtered to the right ratio and all the minerals and all that good stuff for espresso machines, coffee brewers, and drinking water. So the main tank was just for general clean water that all the sinks would use. That's still safe for washing dishes and whatnot. The main freshwater system used a 21-gallon freshwater tank and a 30-gallon tank, and that ratio also met the health department code because you have to have a specific like freshwater to wastewater storage ratio. For that main water system, we used a 12-volt C-flow pump there. I'll put a link to that product in the description. The other water system was just a standard 5-gallon drinking water tank that you see at all the grocery stores. And we made a little box and had a seat belt that actually held it in there that we recycled from a bus conversion project. And also the tape is temporary here. And we used another 12-volt C-flow pump there, but it wasn't quite as big because we didn't need nearly as much water pressure or water flow as the bigger system there. We did have an electric hot water tank here. It was a 7-gallon unit made by Bosch. Runs on 120 volts electrical. Does draw quite a bit of juice though, so you need a good power source for that. We also seat belted the hot water tank in with recycled school bus belts. Later on in the project, when we enclosed the freshwater tank, we routed a little hole in there to keep an eye on the water levels. I thought that ended up being a cool, pretty simple feature there. In terms of sinks, there's actually 5 sinks in this tiny little trailer. 4 of them are sinks that the health department required. They're very small. They're basically hotel pans with holes stamped in them for the drains and like mini traps built into them. The main sink is from IKEA, the nicer looking circle one, and so is the faucet there. In that main sink, we also have like a freshwater drinking spout there. I'll link that product in the description as well. The main water system can be filled by a gravity-fed source, so you can just stick a hose in there and fill up the tanks. Or we also put a C-flow one-way water valve so it could be constantly hooked up to like a city water line. So you have the option there, which is pretty neat. That about covers it for the water overview. I'll get into the electrical now. The electrical is definitely overkill for this trailer because it was wired to be able to pump out so much electricity for high power draw appliances like espresso machines and coffee brewers and just stuff like that, where any bartending trailer probably wouldn't need anything this intricate. You could probably honestly run it all, like to keep it simple, just on extension cords, like neatly screwed up in places, you know. The main system is a 120/240 volt AC system. There's also a 12-volt system here. And when I was first building it out, I was thinking I'd do solar and all sorts of stuff like that for the 12-volt, but there's really no point because anywhere this trailer is gonna be operating, you're probably gonna need power for the fridges, and the 12-volt system really doesn't draw that much juice, so you might as well just have a charge controller to the battery there. But what is nice about having the 12-volt system, even though it doesn't have solar, is that if you were like way out in the boonies, the battery will power the radio and water pumps without a power source. Or if you just needed the water for a minute and you didn't want to hook up to a generator, you have that 12-volt power source available for running lights and all that kind of stuff without needing a 120-volt power source. We did end up running a sound system. It's just a cheap like Bluetooth radio we threw in there. We had exterior waterproof Pioneer speakers that are made for boats, so that's kind of a neat feature. The lighting's all 12 volt, and then the switches here are for the pumps and the lights, just so we could cut that off so there's no accidental battery draw, or if a faucet turned on the road, it wouldn't use all the water and drain the batteries. The charge controller is an IntelliPower. I forget the brand name. I'm pretty sure it's an IntelliPower 120 volt to 12 volt smart battery charge controller thing. I think that wraps up an overview of the mechanics with the water system and the electronics in the trailer. The rest, Ryan and I were mostly doing finishing touches, and these all came together fast because by this point we found a buyer that wanted to buy the trailer. Before, we were just kind of finishing it, hoping that somebody would buy this thing to take it off my hands because, you know, the whole coffee business failed. But we found a buyer. It was a distillery up north in Michigan, so they wanted it pretty quick, so we kind of rushed together to get all these finishing touches done. We were working on building the door. The door was kind of like a simple barn door design we just used 1x lumber for. The outside of the door was like a brushed aluminum sheet, and we siliconed the whole barn door to that to keep it from rotting. The door swings up and it was chained directly to the roof to hold it up. If we had more time, because we were kind of rushing to finish this part, that's one thing I would have done differently. I would have liked to find some gas struts or something. Then we found a really nice walnut slab that had been dried here in Michigan, It was pretty big and worked perfectly for what we needed because like I mentioned, that IKEA countertop on the outside just got destroyed in the rain. So we took it, we cut it to shape, we did a few layers of epoxy on it, and then we installed that onto those metal brackets we had built earlier. We actually had 2 slabs that came out of that. So on the outside of the trailer, there was that bar there, but then right up on the inside, we put another thin slab. There's enough room on the inside of the trailer to add a second countertop, just to give you some more surface to set drinks on at an event or whatnot. That came out to be pretty clean with the door, and we were really happy with how that turned out. From that slab, we had a few extra little pieces that we did some fun stuff with, like the original handles on the back of the trailer. We were able to cut little walnut pieces and epoxy those, and so the handles are actually matching a walnut to the slab that's on the outside, so that was a cool feature. We decided to continue the cedar from the ceiling down to be the backsplash, and we ended up polyurethaning the whole thing just to seal it, because stuff is going to splash everywhere in a bar trailer. We did some paint touch-ups on the exterior, and then to wrap it up, we built some shelving around the water tanks and under the counter that kind of fit everything together. We're trying to do our best to think of how a bartender would store things, even though we're not bartenders ourselves. We think we came up with enough storage in such a small space for a bartender to make it pretty functional. I think that's gonna wrap up what I wanted to cover and just showing people how the build went. It's a little bit embarrassing to own a video production company that Ryan and I both do a lot of work for, but we both did such a bad job capturing the actual build of the trailer, and the final tour is also pretty bad, so I apologize for that in advance. But check out this next clip. We did record just kind of a final walkthrough of it. It's pretty casual, but it'll kind of give you an idea of its whole functionality. Ready?
Ready.
All right, here she is. These doors open up and they come off. It worked out well in this trailer because they can be pretty dangerous if they're just wide open and people are walking around it. These handles on here were duct tape, and Ryan replaced them with some walnut. Worked out pretty well. So these guys open up. This is a big flip down door. It's pretty heavy, made for horses. Almost took you out. And here there's 2 fridges. We just stuck this shim in here for now to keep the door shut. This little latch here. Just fit right under the counter pretty well. And here you've got your freshwater tank. You can see your levels through this cutout, and then this goes under your bar here. So you got some room for storage. You got pumps over there on this side, all close in the box. Under here you've got more storage. This is removable, and there's a hot water heater behind it, and a thing, what else is
Gray water tank.
Oh yeah, gray water tank's under there, and probably something else. Up here we've got a few different circuits, a cedar backsplash, cedar ceiling all the way around.
LEDs.
There's a few sinks and a few plumbing systems. So one of them is a freshwater, they're both freshwater. One of them's a filtered water system, and that's a separate pump. There's this guy here. Blast. This is the other one. And then there's a couple sinks over here for it to be health department approved. Over here you got a few switches and a radio. The radio powers these outdoor speakers. And it's Bluetooth, and then the switches are for the pump, the radio, and the lights over there. Yeah, back panel. You got a 50 amp electrical panel, 50 amp hookup, battery so you could run the pumps offline or off the grid if you needed to. You got a charge controller up in there. Bunch of plumbing stuff over here, exterior hookups. And here's the door. So the door in here is flips up. Here's the exterior. So it's brushed aluminum on the exterior, and you'll only see that when it's down, right? So when it's flipped up, you got some nice barnwood looking stuffs. It's really a 2-person job to get it open right now. This is the original horse trailer lumber that we sanded down and polyurethaned. So you got 2 eyelets on the top and then 2 on here. Let's see if Ryan can do it by himself. Probably not. We can just leave the one on for now. So there's 2 eyelets that hold it open. It worked out pretty well. It's not the worst thing to put up. These little latches here, there's some holes in here that lock it in on the road. And you've got 2 bar surfaces here.
I'm 6'2", so a normal person would look kind of like this.
Yeah, stand up all the way in here.
Plenty of room in here.
Yeah, Ryan's 6'2". So in the back there, you've got a shelf to set some bottles, and then one of them has a little sidewall on there to keep stuff locked in. Here you've got 2 bar surfaces, and then over the wheels, so you got plenty of room to stick stuff into. Bartender Ryan.
Mm-hmm. So while you're serving, you probably have this up. But it depends on where you're serving and what you're doing. Then you can use this door here. So now if someone wants to come over here, get a drink or whatever. Here you go. Or pass me that bag of ice. Or hey, how you doing? Get out of here. You drunk?
Pretty sweet. Yeah, I think it turned out pretty good. We had a lot of rain last night, and nothing ended up in the trailer. These are epoxied.
Dry. We had somebody sit on this last night.
Yeah, within 20 minutes of delivering it, a drunk birthday party came out and gave it a good test, and it didn't break, so it's always good when that happens. Pretty good. If you guys have any other questions about the build, feel free to ask it in the comments. I'd be happy to offer any advice I have from what I learned from this experience. Ryan and I are doing another horse trailer conversion coming up, so if you're interested in this, subscribe. It's gonna be a little bit different. We've already got the trailer. We've got a whole lot of other things happening. We're working on remodeling a house right now that's basically a tiny house from the 1940s. All sorts of content like that we'll be posting here.